morning. We'll be reading from Philippians chapter 1. And we'll be reading through verses 9 through 11. I'll be reading from the NIV translation. And it reads, "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and what may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God."
What a blessing to be here today. Matt, thank you for that very brief introduction. People say I don't need an introduction, but I sure could use a conclusion. So I will try to get to that. I feel so blessed today. Rebecca's here, and miss her, and haven't got to meet Miss Claire yet, but hoping that comes soon. And we've got Papa Tim here. Took him a while, but he's after all these years, he's now a grandpa. And that little Clementine, we know, will be showered with blessings from her family. Tech-savvy people are constantly trying to improve the way we do life. New inventions, improvements, more quality, making things run faster, become smaller, but definitely a part of our lives. One of those modern inventions, how we've gotten away from plugging in a telephone and not being able to leave the house with a telephone. Originally, I think the first battery-charged phone was called a bag phone. And they were also called car phone, because that's about the only place you could use it outside of the house, because you could plug it into the cigarette lighter. Then there were the flip phones, one I just gave up like a week ago. And then in 2007, Apple came out with the first iPhone. And just recently, they came out with the version 13. Continual attempts to improve, to be the best in industry, to be better than the competition. The pursuit of excellence, I'm sure, will continue. Paul's prayer for the Philippians that we just heard in our reading remind you that he prays that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and discernment, so that this translation says, so that you may approve the things that are excellent. I think the version we heard read earlier, that you might approve the things that are best. That's what we're after, isn't it, in life? It should be, as God's people. But sometimes you and I, we have to ask ourselves, in my life, as a follower of Christ, am I giving Him my best? Am I striving to go beyond mere getting by, substandard activities, and trying to do my best? So today, continuing a series that was begun back in September, Give It to Jesus. Take the situations that we find in life and give that to our Lord. I was originally scheduled to speak on the same day as my little sister's birthday, back September 21st. Matt, because of some traveling problems, he was supposed to speak on the 20th to start the series, and I said, why don't you take my date, and I'm sure there'll be another day that I can speak. So today I'm scheduled to speak on my middle sister Carol's birthday. And so I say, happy birthday, Carol, from your younger brother. But what a blessing to speak on this subject. I have chosen, and really since September 21st, my idea on Give It to Jesus has changed many times. I've prepared 3 or 4 or 5 sermons, and I'm not sure if I'm through with this one, if it really fits what I want to say. But the theme, the idea is give it to Jesus because He cares for you. and because He can handle what's going on in our lives. If there are problems, He can strengthen us in the midst and restore some of the brokenness that we might experience in our lives. But we also need to give to Jesus the good things in our lives, lest we become filled with pride or have a sense of self-sufficiency. In 1 Peter chapter 5, in verse 7, Peter wrote, "Cast your anxieties upon Him because He cares for you." Well, I hope I'm not taking too much liberty with the text, but I think we can remove the word anxiety and we can all fill in the blank. Cast your upon the Lord because He cares for you. And that will include, of course, a variety of subjects and ideas, persuasions, difficulties, triumphs. We should be giving those to Jesus because He cares, and He can help us with those. So my emphasis today is on giving Him our goodness, our talents, our passions about life, and our successes, to give Him the best of all that we have in our life. Because sometimes it's hard to do that. Sometimes we think we're doing a pretty good job of things. And oftentimes in our goodness, we don't even think about, God help me to do gooder in the future. I think you know what I meant. But oftentimes our pride gets in the way. And in the verse prior to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, he said, "Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God." And prior to that, in verse 5, he had written, "God is opposed to the proud, but He gives grace to the humble." Sometimes we are content with just getting by. Examine yourself academically. Are you content with a 90 when you could have done better? Are we content with whatever grade, knowing we could have tried harder? Maybe it's like a student many years ago who talked about his grades and that they had been real high and then they began to drop. He was passing everything, but he said, "Ron, I'm just trying to shoot par." See, in golf, a score of 72 is really good. But if you can do much better than 72, why would you be content with just shooting par in the academic realm? Bobby Knight, who has been known for all kinds of things as a coach and very seldom known for some of the real good things in his life, he made a statement one time. He said, "At some point in my coaching career, I came to the conclusion that winning is not everything." Why? Coach Knight was never happy, even after a team victory, if his players did not do their best. And oftentimes there'd be reporters that would come to him and talk about, "Oh, this particular player scored 30 points. Didn't he have a great game?" No, he didn't. He stunk on defense. And he was upset at that because he knew the player could have been better in that area. So in all of this, I'm thinking we've got inventors, we've got coaches, we've got athletes, and the list go on, and they strive for excellence. Should we not, as Christ followers, be constantly striving for excellence? Well, what does the Scripture say about this? And how do we go about doing it? My mind usually turns to 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. As Paul wrote, "Do your best to present yourself unto God as one approved, as a workman who doesn't need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth." Now, tracing that verse out in the history of the English Bible, the King James Version translated that verse, "Study to shew thyself unto God as one approved." He wasn't talking about these kind of shoes, but that's how the Brits use the word "to show" in the 17th century. But study was the word. Well, that's a good word. It didn't fully encompass the idea behind the original, or the word in the original text. The American Revised Version that came out in the late 1800s translated it, give diligence to present yourself unto God as one approved. And then in the middle of the 20th century, the Revised Standard Version translated it, do your best. And many other versions since then have translated it that way. The word diligence basically has two ideas behind it. One is be quick about it, with haste go about what you're called to do, but also to be thorough, to exert yourself in this kind of a manner. So do your best to present yourself unto God. In 2 Peter chapter 1, as Peter begins talking about how God has blessed us in so many ways, having given us everything that pertains to life and godliness, and He's also given us His precious and magnificent promises. Then in verse 5 he says, so you make every effort to add to your faith several virtues. That's again the word, you do your best, or you be diligent. Give God our best effort. And doesn't He deserve that? I mean, after all, didn't He give us His best in sending Jesus? And during the life of Jesus in His ministry, was it substandard? He gave His very best. And how do we go about giving Him His best? I think a lot of it begins with our commitment to what Jesus said when asked about the greatest commandments. He said to love the Lord your God with all, not a little bit of it, but love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind. Give Him your all. We're striving for that. I'm sure I'm giving more of my heart to the Lord now than I have in the past. But I should always be striving to get that love to Him the best that I can give to Him. And why do we do that? Again, it's because He can bless us. And He will bless us when we give Him our all. Sure, we do it out of obedience, but don't we also do it because He cares for us? It's one thing to follow the rules just because you have to. It's another thing to do it because you love the one who gave you these commands. So what does it take for us to give our best to Jesus? I've got several things here I want to mention briefly and probably won't have time to cover all of them. But what does it take to give your best to Jesus? Number one, it all starts out with the word motivation. What are you and I motivated to do? Knowing who God is and knowing what He has done for us should be motivation for us. In Hebrews chapter 11, the author talked about men and women of faith, inspiring examples, how they endured much, dealt with difficulties, frustrations, but they persevered. Then the 12th chapter begins, since we have this great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. We're called to run, and run with perseverance. Doesn't that imply difficulties along the way? Run to the finish line. Don't give up until it's over. Run with perseverance. Then he adds something to that in verse 2. He tells us how we ought to run. By looking to Jesus. There's our motivation. And that's the only real translation of Hebrews 12 I knew. Then I moved down south and I heard someone read another translation. I figured it was Southern translation because it said, run the race with perseverance, fixing your eyes on Jesus. That was a word we didn't use up in Colorado. But I understand the point. Focus. And that becomes our motivation. What have you done in life that was of benefit to others that did not include motivation? Good part of my life, sports have been a part. And I remember few games, there's a special girl that I really wanted to impress. And then my dad, who was a truck driver, oftentimes gone, if he came to my games, I wanted him to be proud of me. He was motivation for me. And then later, playing slow pitch softball with my children sitting there. Go, Dad, hit the ball. Don't make it out this time. Various things, your kids will say. But they were motivation to me. So who are you looking at? What are you looking at as you run this race? Motivation is such an important factor. Colossians 3, if you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on those things above and not on the things of the earth. Why does he write that? Where Jesus is. He is our motivation. And thinking about Him and how He lived life should motivate us to give Him our best. What does it take to give our best to Jesus? Number 2, it takes commitment. Commitment to be like Jesus. To be a servant as He came, giving up heaven's glory to serve on this earth. And how His life was characterized by humility, meekness, all kinds of strength, controlled for the benefit of others. And underlying it all, His desire was to please God. This commitment to Him should lead us to trust Him and put our faith in Him. In the Proverbs, chapter 3, trust in the Lord with all your might. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He'll make your path straight. Again, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Give Him your best. Number 3, it takes determination on our part to give Jesus our best. Because all around us there are distractions. There are things that would detour us. We need to be determined not to give up, not to give in to the pressures all around us. When we're down and we don't want to do what we know we ought to do, I think we need to express that to God. If you were at the Sunset Church yesterday, you heard my good friend Bob Brown talk about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and how he prayed, God, let this cup pass from me. That's what he was wanted. He was grieved. He was filled with turmoil. He was looking at the cross and wishing there were another way. And I think it's okay for you and me to be like that when we face struggles. But also be determined to say what Jesus also said in that prayer that night. Not my will, but yours be done. Be determined to see the will of God through, like He did. But express those struggles you have to God. Express your hurts and your need to continue on. Here's number 4. It takes balance in our lives to give all that we have to the Lord. By balance, I mean there are many things that occupy our time. Some are extremely important, some are trivial and really don't matter that much. But if you're married, you better give importance to your wife. If you have children, you have to give important time to your wife. I remember the scene from Karate Kid when Daniel-san is just not paying attention. You remember Mr. Miyagi says, focus, Daniel-san, focus. All right? You got to have, I'm sorry he didn't say focus, he said balance. Oh, I messed that up, sorry. Because focus is one of my next points, but he said balance, Daniel-san, right? If I'm not mistaken, he was in a boat at the time. I don't remember these things. Man, this happened a century ago. Some of you weren't even born back then. Give me a break, okay? So, balance. That's what it takes. To balance our commitments in life. And that we, in the pursuit of giving our very best to one area, we neglect another area that is also important. And trying to prioritize and determine what is of most importance and trying to give our best to that. Sometimes maybe you as a student or me in ministry, whatever our situations are, we are focused on one thing and we work and work and work, and we don't have time for other things that are also important in our lives. Have you ever been characterized by that phrase, oh, this guy, he's working so hard, he's burning the candle at both ends? I heard a guy from this very place several years ago said, burning the candle at both ends doesn't make you any brighter. It just causes you to burn out sooner. And so be careful with that you have a balance in how you approach life's commitments. But with everything you do, Paul made that statement in 1 Corinthians 10, whether you eat, whether you drink, whatever you do, do it to the glory of God. Put Him in first place in all that you do. It requires our best. Here's number next. What does it take for us to give our best to Jesus? Focus. Continual focus. We need to remember that without this focused attention, it'll be easy to forget. We'll find it easy to get distracted. Compromise might be accepted. And then we just maybe slowly come to an end. Continual focus. Remember what you have given to the Lord and keep giving it. We also need to be, here's the next point, flexibility. We need to be able to adjust as life goes on. Because sometimes I want to give my best to the Lord and I don't get to do that particular aspect of what I think is my best. And because of that, maybe I'm disappointed. But will I give Him my best in the other areas? In the working situation, we don't always do what we love. But we can always love what we do. Depends on our attitude and how we approach things. But we need to be flexible in our lives. I'm sure there were some servants that didn't want to be servants. And they didn't like their masters. But here's what Paul wrote to them in Colossians chapter 3, beginning in verse 22. Slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters, not with external service only as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. So don't just serve your masters when they're watching you. Do it with fear toward the Lord. And then verse 23, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord. I think that heartily has the idea of do it the best way you can. And then whatever next number is, what does it take to give your best to the Lord? Acceptance. Acceptance when I don't have the same best in quantity that I did in the past. I've known some people, aging, physical infirmities, limitations in life, and they regret, some men, that they can't be preaching a sermon every Sunday. And others regret that they can't cook meals and take them to their neighbors. Yes, we've got to accept sometimes life as it is and find something else to give our best at and give that to the Lord. So we've got to accept sometimes the limitations that come and give your less than what used to be my best toward the things that please Him. The acceptance. I love this passage in the Psalms. It's Psalm 73 and verse 26. As the writer, one of the sons of Asaph, writes, and if I find it, I'll read it. Here we go. He says, my flesh and my heart may fail me, but God is the strength of my heart, and He is my portion forever. So, when strength fails, sometimes we just need to accept that. But know that He is our portion and we can still serve Him in that way. The last on this list that I want to mention, what helps us to give our best to the Lord? There is the word avoidance. There are some things we need to avoid. We need to be aware and avoid these dangers. Pride. I'm giving him my best. Aren't I something special? Careful with that. Competition is another thing we need to avoid. I'm giving more than this brother or this sister. We're not in competition. Paul did not write to Timothy, Timothy, do my best to present yourself unto God. And he didn't write, do the new convert's best to present yourself unto God. No, he said, you give him your best. So avoid the competition, because we can always find others we're doing better than they are, and of course that can lead to pride as well. We need to avoid the acceptance of low standards, of just shooting par. And of course we also need to avoid an attitude of being overly critical toward others, because that's one of the things as we deal with knowledge, we gain understanding. We recognize when others are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, I know some laws regarding speed limits, right? And I can point out people speeding very easily. I got to be careful not to be overly critical toward them, that attitude. And some people are just critics. That's the way they live their lives. So, as we wrap this up, some areas that I should give Jesus my best in faith. And where there's weakness, seek to grow in that area. Obedience. In serving others. I have a one another relationship with the family of God. I need to give Jesus my best as it relates to my family, especially in my situation, my wife. I need to give my best to Jesus when I'm tempted to sin and seek His help rather than think I can handle it myself. And when I sin, I need to give Jesus my best attitude of repentance, that I will seek not to live that way anymore. Here's something especially for me. I need to give my best to Jesus when it comes to working with Moodle and Zoom. Oh boy, too many late nights. I could speak on that longer than I should, but I want to give my best attitude to the Lord also. And to you who are students, I hope you'll take this to heart and give your best to your students. My life here is preparing for heaven. In Hebrews 4, verse 11, the writer said, "Let us give diligence to enter that rest, so that we will not fall through following the same example of disobedience." We've got examples of people who do not and will not give their best. Let's give diligence to enter His rest. Determine what your best is. Give it to the Lord. He will take it and He will bless you 100 times over, because He can and because He cares. Remember Paul's words to Timothy. Do your best to present yourself unto God. Do your best to present. What is your present to God? Give Him your best.